The tax man could actually take your home, and Aussies are actually furious about this law. Now, this is just not clickbait, it's true. When you look at future generations and how your assets are going to go forward, there's a lot of different things you can do to talk about why you're doing certain structures, because it can't be for asset protection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And a lot of people ask you about this, about the
Mm.
unrealized capital gains.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's very topical at the moment. Look, it's really very simple. It comes down to, and I don't want to get into politics, but it essentially says this, that once you have like a total superannuation balance or benefit that exceeds $3 million, then you will be taxed at the greater amount, which is 30%, on any benefits that are achieved over $3 million.
And look,
Yeah.
I did the calculations on a property that's going to be worth more than 3 million. And when you look at the rent you get from it, the rent will cover the difference anyway. So that's one good thing about property. Hello, George Markoski and Jeff Bennett coming to you live from the Money for Life podcast. Welcome and hello. We've got a great show tonight. We're going to be talking about asset protection, but what I want to talk about is the tax man could actually take your home, and Aussies are actually furious about this law. Now, this is just not clickbait, it's true. And I'm going to actually, you need to stay to the end because I'm going to talk to you about what happened with a couple where they tried to cover the assets. What he did, he put it in his wife's name, and the ATO used this little known law to actually attack and take their family home. But also stay at the end because we're going to show you what to do instead, because the old ways of asset protection are not working. You really need to be on top of the game. And I've got Jeff here who really knows this stuff really well from Super Strategist, and it's going to be fantastic. Now, we've got a few questions from last week. Last week, we had an excellent session with Kamal Ravikant, and a lot of people asked questions. So, Charmaine, do you mind reading them out and I'll answer them?
One of the questions from last week was around the current war and how that's going to affect the property market, because a lot of people are concerned that this current war with Iran is going to affect Australia and property.
Yeah, well, look, anything that happens in the Middle East is going to have a big effect because that's where oil comes from. And oil is really important when it comes to the economy. Now, oil is used in transport and manufacturing a lot of stuff. So, with Israel and Iran, even though they've got a fragile ceasefire at the moment, we don't know if it's going to last or not. And if they close the Gulf of Hormuz, it's going to be really bad because that's 20% of the oil in the world. And as you saw what happened in COVID, COVID restricted a lot of the ships and oil and everything else moving around, and that caused inflation. So if the war continues, it's going to create inflation. What does that mean for property investors? It means it's going to push property prices up. But not only that, it's going to push price up of everything. So get ready for it. So what I say is, if there's a war and there's more inflation, well, there's going to be winners and losers. The losers are going to be people with money in the bank and people that have got a 9-to-5 job, and the winners are going to be people that have got investment properties and that have got passive income from their growth.
Fantastic. Another question was asked, like, how did you get into this biohacking and this health space? And of all the different things you've tried, what have you found that's moved the needle the most? This is coming back to the session you had with Kamal.
Yeah, look, me and Kamal had a chat the other day, and what we're doing is we're going to do another session and go deep because it'd take me an hour to answer that question. So I'd rather answer it really clearly. So we're going to go back and do it again, but we're going to go more advanced stuff that we do.
Another question was if you could just remind everyone what Kamal's books were and his last name. I had an email requesting that from Diana Davidson.
Kamal Ravikant is, that's his name, and he's brothers with someone that's probably a lot more famous that you probably know, which is just lost my thought now. There you go. So he's famous and I don't even know his name. But Kamal wrote a book called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And what I'll do is I'll put a post in the group so you can have a look. It's a great book. because Kamal went through a lot of issues and almost died on the operating table. And it was a really big comeback of what he did, which is pretty amazing. His brother is Naval Ravikant, right? And Naval Ravikant is one of the top angel investors in the world. And Kamal's actually very good as well. So what Kamal and I do, we both invest together in angel investing. And a lot of the stuff we invest in is recommended by his brother, who's very, very smart at this sort of thing.
I think the last question we had from last week, like, how do you get access? Because that was the common theme, once you're successful in property and wealth creation, there was a lot of mention about access to health and so forth. So how does one get into those access spaces, George?
Yeah, look, life is all about access. It's about who you know to unlock the keys. And I guess part of the thing is, being part of our group at Positive Property gives you access to properties that you wouldn't get access to, but also circle of safety, like people like Jeff Bennett that we got here, right? And also with all the health stuff and biohacking, that's another thing because I think, the number one thing, this is what I say to people. If you haven't done this already, the number one thing you need to do is replace your income through property. Once you've done that, then your options open up. And that's when you start looking into biohacking and health and other stuff like that. And being part of our group obviously gives you access to a lot of stuff like that.
Well, that's the whole list of questions I had from last week, George.
Beautiful. Excellent. Excellent. Now we can get started and talk with Jeff. Okay, Jeff, let's get started and talk asset protection. Now, should I talk about what happened in the situation? Because this is, or do you know it off by heart?
Well, maybe you can talk about, I suppose, just by way of introduction to that, the discussion about asset protection. And really, I was just a little bit overwhelmed just listening to the way that you're talking about your health there, because I think everyone primarily comes to Positive Property to talk about building wealth, but there's so many more important things to that. Of course, it's like after we've all made money, what do we kind of do then? So, and then there's not just the process of acquiring wealth, but I always give the example of putting cookies in a cookie jar. So anyone can go and toss the cookies in the cookie jar, but it's actually keeping a lid on top of that cookie jar. So how do we actually keep the cookies in the cookie jar and then be able to enjoy our wealth and focus on those things that we all aspire for, and that is actually just living a good life.
Yes,
I'm happy.
That's a really good point about the cookie jar and everything else, because building your wealth is one thing, but how do you keep your assets safe? That's the other question. You know what I mean? And the problem is most people don't look at this until it's too late.
What is too late? Too late really is once you know that you've got a problem, because the ATO and further to that ASIC take a very dour view on you commencing your asset protection journey once you know that you've got a problem. It's fundamentally inadequate if you commence the process once you've got a known problem. So there's always the saying that we use in asset protection that you don't wait for a rainy day to mend a leaky roof. So it's always just about putting yourself in a position where you have a very clear understanding as to what it is you are trying to achieve, and that if that is to put yourself and your family in a better position tomorrow than you are in today, it just sometimes it is good to sit down with a cup of coffee and a blank sheet of paper and have a very clear understanding of the map towards your wealth, how it is you're building bricks on your journey towards building that wealth. But not only that, how it is that you can sustain that for the benefit of your family and your beneficiaries.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, what a lot of people do to protect their assets is they normally get their primary place of residence, they put it in their spouse's name and think, okay, we're safe. And what I alluded to at the beginning of this is a couple just did that. And there was a story about Bosniak versus FCT. And what happened was the gentleman had a business and he owed a lot of money to ATO, and he put his primary place of residence in his wife's name. The ATO took it to the High Court and said they could take it, even though she didn't have any debts at all.
Yep. So it goes to the question of intent, and with regard to intent, if it also goes to the question of at what particular point did the activity commence where the transfer of the assets began. So look, I've spoken at length to ASIC, I've spoken at length to the ATO about these types of cases, and I've spoken to them on the record and off the record. Probably one of the most famous cases is that of it's a name that probably most people know. I won't speak about the intricate details, but more generally about it. But Nathan Tinkler was someone who was Australia's probably youngest billionaire. He just made money at such an incredible rate that it kind of overtook him, and some people have described him as a real gambler.
This is a great story, and I remember you telling me about this. So what did he make?
That's right.
What did he make his money in?
Coal. So
Yep.
he's effectively just a like a fly in, fly out type miner, and he had a big appetite for for, how would I say it tactfully? He's a bit of a gambler, I suppose. It's fair enough to say that. He went and got his family home, and slid all of his chips in to a particular tenement, mining tenement, which he believed was rich in coal. So he then farmed that out to, I believe it was MacArthur Coal, farmed it out to MacArthur Coal, so that he just got a percentage royalty. And don't quote me, but I think it might have been up to about 8% or maybe 10%. And then it was at the time when the mining boom just went, it didn't just go boom, it went kaboom. And he went from, just being a knockabout guy to being in the big time. And there's many different versions of what then occurred to him, but the mining boom started to slow down. But it's probably a reasonable description to say that the way that he then handled his money was kind of analogous to the way that he came into his money. And he went and bought massive amounts of thoroughbreds. He went and had a breeding facility for those thoroughbreds. And then there was news around town about the fact that he wasn't able to meet his bills as and when they became due. So poor old Nathan had, he also owned football teams like the Newcastle Knights, and I think a Newcastle soccer team as well. He then had the regulatory.
He went a big spending buck around.
He really, really did. I think he was trying to desperately diverse his income sources away from the mining sector once he knew that he was kind of up to his neck in it, and it seemed to not be going the way that he wanted it to. So that also created a massive amount of debts, and then people started to come after him. He did have some good advice very early on, before any of this came to fruition, where he had set up some trust structures and had reallocated some assets to the point where his wife had a mansion about $18 million, I think it was, and
that's a nice mansion.
That was in the trust, and when they came to effectively sink him, to declare him bankruptcy, and his creditors chased him into bankruptcy. And there was a lot of arguments around this, and I don't know how much is true or not, but around the tables of the professionals, that's often talked about that potentially was pursued because he didn't come from money, and his story was that he just blew up, and then the people who he owed money to then were vigorously chasing him. But it got down to a point as to whether or not he's going to go into bankruptcy, and he did, as a matter of fact, go into bankruptcy. But that wasn't the end of Nathan Tinkler. He actually utilized the funds which he had stifled away in his, or should I say, legally structured into his trust in order to then go and fight his bankruptcy verdict, and was able to overturn that to the point where his bankruptcy was then quashed, and he's made a number of different plays in a number of different industries since then, most notably trying to get back into coal. So the story really about that, he also had moved his actual company over into a trust, but they were able to have some success in being able to recover some of those funds within his company. I went and approached, I play a role where I'm reasonably well known within various of the finance communities. So I'm a Master of Ceremonies at the Financial Counsellors Association in Queensland, and ASIC were presenting, ATO were presenting, and just I've got a particular passion around this particular area. But I went and approached them with a view to having a discussion with them, and they weren't happy to talk on the record, but off the record, they just said, look, we couldn't touch Nathan Tinkler's assets that were in the trust. So I've heard it firsthand from them that it is a very effective strategy in order to protect assets. The laws exist for those reasons, to be able to put them into, to be held on trust for some future purpose. And the same rules that allow that and the strength and protect the trustees, the same rules that protect your assets as you move forward.
Yeah. So and this is the thing, like at the end of the day, there's a lot of theory out there, right? And there's actually quite a famous lady that was going around doing asset protection. Not going to mention name now, but what happened was people were paying all this money to do asset protection, and then they all lost their money because she wasn't doing it properly. And she's been banned from practicing law from the ACCC, and she had to pay back all the money. Then the thing is, she was talking theory, not practice. And what I like about what you're talking about, this is practice, because what happens in real life and what happens in theory are two different things. And we really want to talk practice whenever we talk something important, not just theory, correct?
That's true. The other thing is that we can sometimes lose sight of how it is practically feasible for ourselves whenever we talk about people like Nathan Tinkler. So something probably a little bit more closely approximated to ourselves rather than Nathan Tinkler is there's a plumber who was just going about. He was had a small business, and he was just working in a particular shopping centre, and his work created a massive flood within the shopping centre. He was busy all day. He was kind of doing the work of three men because he worked hard and wanted to put his family in a better position. His insurance had lapsed, and he had no cover. And so he was in a position where he had some asset protection. And while he went under himself, it wasn't the end of him and his family. So,
wow, that was lucky that he had some asset protection, because most people don't have it.
That's right. And so, you don't need to be a multi-billionaire for this to be specifically relevant to you. There are any number of stories where it's become immediate and relevant to people who have seemingly, everyday sort of jobs. So I think it definitely needs to be in your discussion when you're talking about a wealth creation strategy.
Absolutely. The thing is, though, and one thing we always need to be mindful of, there's always a trade-off, because the more solid your asset protection, the less control you have, and flexibility, because there's different types. Like when you start to invest in property, you want a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to do things. And if you tighten the thing right down, it does make it difficult as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. It can be a quagmire in terms of trying to sort it out for yourself. You need to have someone with you to steer you through. There are implications in a great many areas. Borrowing capacity. If you gift your principal place of residence to a trust, well, the trust owns the principal place of residence. You can then steward a network of contracts where you're able to then go and live in it. We call it a gift and loan strategy, where you would give your asset, principal place of residence, to the trust that you control. You then have a structured living arrangement between the trust, ironically, which is controlled by you, but between the trust and yourself. And that's a way that you can distance the risk from that particular asset leaving you, and also still being able to enjoy the property. Then going to try and get a loan. I mean, the trust can't actually make money in that context, because you're living in the property. You are the one that still has the salary, and you therefore have the income, which the bank is very, very much looking for in order to try and get the loan. So there are implications. If you were to die, you essentially can't give your property to a beneficiary. You need to have provided for that within the trust itself, because the trust will have a ruling document. In the industry, that's referred to as a trust deed. The trust deed is the most important document in the trust, and that stipulates all of the rules about the creation of the trust and the dissolution of the trust, and at what point, and where those assets and how those assets are to be distributed. So there are a lot of implications, and the only takeaway from that is that you would need to see someone who talks about this and lives and breathes in this space on a daily basis, rather than trying to chat GPT it. Because if you chat GPT it, I'll guarantee you that the lawyers will have a field day with it, and probably so too will ASIC and the ATO.
Totally. There's certain things that ChatGPT can't do. Now, Charmaine's got a question. Should one start a trust right away, or wait until you have a certain amount of property? Do trust offer tax benefits?
Well, a trust doesn't really offer too many trust benefits. It's a bit of a hangover from what used to occur in the 80s and the 90s. Trusts were an absolute field day for taxation benefits. The trust really doesn't get charged really tax. It gets taxed when the funds or the income is distributed to the beneficiary. The beneficiary will then declare income from the trust. The trust itself, if it does hold assets in there, like I'm talking liquid assets, like income that it's received, if it holds it in there for longer than a period of 12 months, now the ATO will tax it at a higher rate. You don't necessarily think of the asset protection or the trust as a vehicle for a taxation benefit. They really tightened it up after the 90s into the 2000s, because people were, common thing that we all used to hear certainly when I was a kid, was a family trust. And then what people used to do is, if they were a plumber or a baker or a banker, they used to get paid their salary into the family trust, and then the person would distribute it amongst their children, which they were legally able to do, and then get them all underneath the tax thresholds to make it a viable vehicle for that. If you now pay someone from a trust who is a minor, they get charged at 66% tax, just because there are penalties above the penalties for paying out minors out of a discretionary trust. So the ATO has really tightened up on that. So it's not so much a go-to for taxation purposes. There can be that by way of like a testamentary discretionary trust, which is how you receive it from a will, but generally speaking, you wouldn't be going into it to be claiming fantastic taxation benefits.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, because the one thing we want to do really is maximize our taxation benefits at the beginning. Because what happens when you buy property? The most negative a property is when you first get it. And every year it becomes more positive, but also you don't have a lot of equity when you start with. So, so you got to get that balance because when you're first starting, you want to get as many tax benefits as you can. After 10 years, the tax benefits don't matter anymore because you've used up most of it.
Yeah.
However,
Yep.
but after 10 years, you've doubled in value and you've got equity.
Mm.
So the timing, how do you get the timing right to get, how do you get, how do you have your cake and eat it too? That's the question.
Yeah, and like, well, I get asked all the time, what's the right time for me to start to think about asset protection? You know, we always like to say that, you know, as soon as someone's got money, well, they're a target for being sued. It seems to me, and they're not being sued by, everyone thinks, like America, that Australia is becoming very litigious. It's got nothing to do with people being litigious. It's actually the lawyers themselves. Lawyers themselves create an environment where if they identify that there's money anywhere, well, that's where they're going to. So it doesn't matter what industry you are in. If you begin to acquire wealth and you're down a particular pathway, I was doing up some scenarios for the unrealized capital gains tax for a client of ours. They've got 7 properties in just in their super, and they've got a tremendous amount of properties in their personal name also. You know, they've got a trust plan, and they, you know, moved to that probably about 8 or 9 years ago, so they're protected. And you know, they were thinking about it probably after they got about their 3rd or 4th property.
Yeah.
But again, you're a target anytime you kind of amass any amount of wealth, and the earlier you start it, the better off you are as far as the protections are concerned. So what I was talking about earlier when we were first saying is that the ATO takes a very dour look on things. In that case that you mentioned, where they were able to take it from his wife, is because you can't begin this process if you've got a known creditor. If you've got a debt that you know is chasing you, any amount of you moving the assets, you are not protected. In Australia, we have a statute of limitations, which is 7 years. So the rule of thumb is that you needed to have enacted this strategy 6 years prior to an action actually commencing within the court.
To give you total safety, correct?
Yeah, to give you total umbrella
Yeah,
strategy
but Jeff,
of protection.
but if you do something for a different purpose and you can demonstrate that, that helps your case, though, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly helps your case if you can demonstrate that you know, that you have got reasonable grounds to have transferred assets to a trust, and it wasn't as a result of that. The court will certainly
Have a
hear
good look
those.
at it. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the thing is, you need to really base your case and be really clear. Once
Yep,
7 years hits, it doesn't matter. The reason doesn't matter because it's too late,
yep,
correct? But which is
yep.
the good
That's
part.
right.
But
Yep.
before then, you need to get really good reason, and I guess
Mm.
part of it is, I guess, when you look at future generations and how your assets are going to go forward, there's a lot of different things you can do to talk about why you're doing certain structures because it can't be for asset protection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you essentially need to have done this at a time when everyone's in a frame of mind that they, you know, that they aren't being pursued.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. Yep. Now, you touched on, and a lot of people are asking about the
Mm.
unrealized capital gains.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very topical at the moment. I'm
So a lot of
probably
people are
fielding
asking
about 5 or
questions.
6 calls a day about that.
Exactly. So
Um,
can we touch on that topic because people keep asking and about this?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's really very simple. It comes down to, and I don't want to get into politics too much because I appreciate and respect that everyone has a different view on politics, but fundamentally, the ethos of each different party are these. We have the Liberal Party in Australia, which doesn't mean anything about the Liberals that they call them in America. Liberal Party in Australia essentially is we want the government to be hands off. We want just the economy to flow naturally. You work hard, you get more. It's kind of a capitalist sort of approach. The Labor Party, well, not traditionally, very specifically in their policy document, which you can download, they say that they are a socialist party. You know, they have socialist values, and that they have a clear doctrine and edict to move money from the wealthy to, those that they perceive are in greater need. Now, we have a government at the moment that is the Labor Party. What they generally do is they target those who have, created some wealth. So that just gives you a little bit of context as to where we are. And the reason why that's important is that all these laws that have been talked about, they aren't necessarily enacted as yet. I've read the explanatory memorandum of the touted legislation, but it essentially says this, that once you have a total superannuation balance or benefit that exceeds $3 million, then you will be taxed at the greater amount, not the concessional amount of 15%, but the greater amount, which is 30%, on any benefits that are achieved over $3 million. So I did up scenario today again for our clients, and obviously I'm not going to say who it is, but I can share with you just very broadly what their position is. 7 properties. They've got probably about, I don't know, had a total value, I think, of about, let me just see if I've still got this up here. Hang on. Okay, total value of 5.18. Debt 2.1. They've got, so let's say equity of 3 million. Equity of 3 million, but the husband's got like 55%. The wife's got about 45%. So collectively, the fund has got $3 million in net assets. And automatically we go, oh no, they're up for tax now. They're not. The husband has only got, of that 3 million, he's only got 1.65 million as his total superannuation benefit. So it's individual basis, your net amount needs to be $3 million.
Yes, so it's quite high. It's quite high because it's net and not gross too. That's the thing. And that makes a big difference.
That's right, the benefit. So forget about what the value of the property is. You're not taxed on the value of the property. You've then got to pay the debt. So they take that into account and then just get the net benefit of your superannuation. And then it's, if you've got mum and dad in the self-managed superannuation fund, then they've each got a share of that amount of money. So what I say to people is, look, superannuation is just one area of your creation of wealth. You will have some properties in your personal name by the time you retire. And well, if you're following George's system and positive property system, you will have a couple of properties in your personal name. You have a couple of properties in your superannuation. More than enough of a bridge there to, put it this way, wouldn't it be nice if we were able to retire with $3 million net in our superannuation, not even including the funds that we've accrued in our personal name? If you've got to that stage, well, what we'd be saying to you is, job well done. You've got enough money to live with.
You're going to have a lot of
live
money.
on.
Yes. And look, I did the calculations on a property that's going to be worth more than 3 million. And when you look at the rent you get from it, the rent will cover the difference anyway. So that's one good thing about property. So a $3 million property, you're going to get around about 5% return on that, right? So 3 million times 5%, that's 150,000 a year. So if, let's say, it goes up above the threshold, you got so much money coming in rent, you'll be able to cover the unrealized gain really easily.
Yeah.
That's
right.
About property. If it was gold, it'd be different. You have to sell some gold because you wouldn't be able to cover it. And if it was shares,
that's right.
Sell some shares. But with property, you're getting an income as well.
Yeah, because it's not just capital appreciating; it's income generating as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the whole part of the strategy.
That's the beauty of it. So the beautiful part is you won't ever have to sell your house.
Yeah, well, we don't want you to have to
take the money from the rent. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And then the other point, and I'll finish where I started there, just on this. At the moment, it's talk. If it does come in the way that it's touted to, don't be afraid of it, because there's plenty of headroom there before you need to start getting work. There are then strategies that you can employ even when you do get close to that as well. We can buy some more property, and then we can depreciate the fixtures and the fittings, and
Exactly.
there are
That's right.
lots of different strategies that
Get
we can
another property,
utilize.
get $80,000 in depreciation, and suddenly you're below the threshold again.
Exactly. So, look, it's not the doom and gloom that it's being made out to be. There is argy-bargy on both sides of politics. The Libs are saying, "Oh, this is going to ruin it," and you guys are, and then the Labor Party is saying, "Well, this is a fair cop as far as we're concerned." But the thing is, in my career, I've seen a lot of talk about a lot of different legislation, and we've always jumped here and there. Let's wait until we see that it's actually implemented.
Takes a lot of will and a lot of effort to get legislation passed through anyway.
Yep,
And
that's right.
And luckily, this is not going to be that bad. But I mean, look, I'm just fundamentally against unrealized capital gains tax, full stop, because it's unfair, because you haven't actually realized.
It's completely unfair. It's completely unfair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should be able to, until you realize something, you shouldn't have to pay tax on it. That's just fundamentally wrong.
Exactly. And then if we just play this game of chess out 2 or 3 pieces, which I've done in a number of different scenarios, is what does the actual government want to do? They actually want to have more housing, more development, in order to be able to facilitate this very real housing crisis that faces the federal government right now and at state level. And if there is that level of fear where people are actually having to, they're going to be getting rid of property, left, right, and centre, if they, or at least not building too many more. Because
exactly.
There are so many people that are getting self-managed superannuation funds. I'm meeting maybe 5 a week of people who are jumping into self-managed superannuation funds. If you've already enacted that strategy, well done. The people that I'm seeing are saying, I should have started this a couple of years beforehand. And, so if you've drunk the Gatorade a couple of years ago and got onto self-managed super, well, fantastic. If you're just starting now, well, the best time to buy a property, I always say, is 10 years ago. The next best time is right now. So,
well, the thing is, right now is a very good time, and the reason it's so good is because we've got the biggest housing crisis in history. This has never happened before, right? We've never in the last 200 years had such a bad housing crisis. Now, what they're predicting, it's going to be a super cycle for property, because property normally doubles every 7 or 10 years, and then it retracts. But when you've got such a strong demand and such a little supply, it's going to keep pushing things up. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, that's right. And where is it going to stop? There is a real problem in Queensland with the infrastructure that needs to be built because of the Olympic Games that are coming here. But the immigration levels in Australia at the moment are such that they cannot build enough houses in the next few years to sustain the population growth that's already arrived.
No. I mean, we even if no one came, we still don't have enough properties.
Yeah.
And you look at Albo's housing target, he's missed it every single month since he put it in.
Yeah.
We've never built that many properties since 10, 15 years ago. Like, we've never even come close. The fact of it is, Australia's lost the ability to build houses.
Yeah. And I say to my clients, I go for a walk every morning, and there are people who are living in cars who have actually got jobs, and they might have a Coles badge on or something like that. That these people aren't homeless people. These are people who have got jobs who don't have houses. And there's a real difference to when I was growing up as a kid.
No, it's shocking. And I never thought Australia would be like America and England and those other countries where there's homeless people everywhere. It's terrible. You know what I mean? And we need to fix it. It's one of those things that should be the government's priority more than anything else. And instead of stuffing around with playing with people's super, we should be looking how do we, because I mean, Labor, they're trying to do the opposite. And the Greens
Yeah.
are as well. They're trying to get rid of negative gearing, which would even be worse for property.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
should they
that's right.
should they should add more negative gearing, give people
Yeah,
more bonuses to build houses because the government has proven they cannot build houses. It's up to
yep,
investors to invest and help fix this housing prices. We're the only ones
yeah,
that can fix this.
yep, that's right. And I'm sick and tired of it being a political football, but they do come up with these really quirky ideas about what they think will appeal to their constituents, and it just seems to make things worse. And we can get into a whole lot of other areas like electricity and fossil fuels relative to it never ends. And there's always two sides to politics, and
Yep,
but it's worthwhile noting that it does have a very real impact on the economy, and that's where we get interested because that impacts our positive property members.
absolutely. And that's why, I don't like getting political, but at the end of the day, liberal is better for the economy and better if you're middle class. That's the fact of it.
Yeah, well, their ethos is more that like let the economy find its own spot, and they are less interventionist than the Labor government. But I would agree with you. If you were into property, you would probably be more supportive of a liberal ethos than a Labor ethos.
Definitely. Now, I've got a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Do you pay stamp duty again if you move a property that you already own to a trust?
Yes, you do. It's a different entity, so there could be stamp duty impacts as a result of moving it.
Yep. What are bloodline trusts?
Bloodline trusts, it's actually been colloquialized. It's actually the property, the intellectual property of one particular law firm. They own the trademark bloodline trust, but a bloodline trust traditionally refers to in a will where you leave a testamentary discretionary trust, which just means setting up a trust for your beneficiaries if you were to pass away, and then not able to get access to that for a certain period of time. So what we would advise all of our clients is if they're getting a will, they should have a testamentary discretionary trust. That trust should last until your minor beneficiaries are 35 years old,
Hmm.
not 18, but 35. And the reason that is because they can still get money from the trust, but through a trustee. So it might be your sister, might be your brother, someone who you know, love, and trust. You'll appoint them as the trustee. So you've now passed away. All your money goes into a trust that continues to be invested. And when that youngest child turns 35, then you allow those funds to be distributed equally to your children. That's effectively what a bloodline trust is. What it does is it prevents a spouse who might be married to one of your beneficiaries, who marries them and then divorces them before they turn 35. Um, that they traditionally can't get access to the money because it's being held in a trust.
Yep.
But other things as well, like if the way a normal will works is if the children turn 18, they get their money. They get a lot of great friends who want to go to Ibiza and and the Greek islands, and spend all of the money, and then the children turn 24, and we've seen this a number of times in our business with our clients and their children where someone has passed away. The kids turn 24 years old, they've got no money and they've got no friends,
Yep.
because they weren't really friends to begin with.
Yep.
Um,
Okay. Albo is exempt. He doesn't have to share any of his wealth. Yeah. So the politicians are exempt of the $3 million super thing, aren't they?
Well, yes, by virtue of the fact that they are generally participate in a defined benefit scheme, which is unique to government workers who have been there for a long time, and most politicians have. Um, in federal parliament, they also have a special bonus on top of that where they're invited into a scheme. Albo was publicly exposed where he said prior to the election, he was asked a very direct question: "Are you going to be impacted this? What if your investment property goes above this?" He said, "Well, I'll be taxed exactly the same," and he got found out very, very quickly that that wasn't the case.
Yep, yep. And it's interesting, the property that he bought, there was a major upgrade on the road going to his property, like $100 million getting spent.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Surprise, surprise.
I know exactly. Adam
Yeah.
said having an SMSF and a trust is the way to go. Question mark. Yeah, so with an SMSF,
Yeah.
that's protected more than anything else anyway, isn't it?
It's, well, a lot of confusion about SMSF. All trusts, if you're with SA Super, Vic Super, Q Super, no matter CBus, AMP, all of them are trusts. An SMSF is also a trust, and all it does is replicate the really big guys. An SMSF just replicates exactly the same structure. That's how it's legal. It's exactly the same structure. It's the only difference is the big guys have got 600,000 members and you guys have got 2 members. They're the only difference between the structures that occur between big super and small super. So a trust, by definition, is just a holding entity for some future event. And in the case of superannuation, that future event is just simply your retirement.
Retirement.
So you can't touch it. There are very strict laws around trusts. You can't touch it until this future event occurs. In superannuation, for other trusts, the rules are written into the trust deed. And the good thing about being a trustee is that you get to write those rules. So for an asset protection trust, which we refer to as a discretionary trust, that trust, the trustee, gets to be written by yourselves.
Yep.
Or us.
But super funds are protected by the government anyway. That's
Yep, by virtue of the fact that they are trust, but yes, they are.
So for example, if you owe the tax department money, even that, they can't take it out of your super, can they?
No, they can't take it out of your super, and you are protected against any other debtor. I think I understand what you mean now. Yeah, if you are being pursued, it's very, very unlikely that you would have money taken out of your superannuation. The ATO is extending some of its powers for compliance on the 1st of July, so next week, for how they pursue people. So the compliance elements are ramping up for particularly what they call the shadow economy, that is people who don't pay their tax. So yeah, but superannuation is protected.
Yep. Okay, so Emma said, with the strong demand and low supply of houses, is there also a risk of quality of homes that we built in future, i.e. defects rushing through builds? How do we make sure we're buying quality, not falling to builds that are rushed? Well, Emma, there's always a challenge with the building industry of getting quality. That's just the fact of it. And because you're part of Positive Property, we're very careful who we deal with. And most people we deal with, we've known for a long time, and bring the right quality because of the long-term relationship. Because it's hard when you're one person and you just go with a builder. You're one person, one property. It's hard to get that assurance of quality. But when you've got a big group, one of the biggest buying group in Australia, you've got a lot more pull, a lot more strength in negotiations. Hope that helps. How does asset protection work if you're a company director in Australia and New Zealand? Can either country go after assets in another country?
I'd need to know more about the specific circumstances, but generally speaking, if you owe a debt somewhere, then you can be pursued for that debt. The matter will come down to the perceived nature of the contract, where the contract was written, and if you've got money owing in New Zealand, the nature of the contract would be in New Zealand, and therefore it would be a New Zealand jurisdiction that you would pursue that debt. So it would be up to New Zealand to pursue that debt to someone who was in Australia, and vice versa. It goes down to contract law and the nature of the contract and the nature of the debt, which is why I'm saying I need to know a little bit more about that. But look, if you're worried about one country relative to another, it would be incumbent upon that country where the debt is owed for to pursue you. But you can still get served in Australia from New Zealand. It's just the papers, and you have an obligation to fulfill any court orders in any jurisdiction within which the matter's being heard. If you don't fulfill those obligations of that court, well, then you will have ramifications in that jurisdiction. That meaning you might not ever be able to go back to New Zealand. Otherwise, you might get arrested for not going to court.
Exactly. So every time when you've got a different country, it's a lot more complex. So it's a lot harder for people to chase you. That's the fact of it, and costs a lot more. So the debt would have to be really big, otherwise it would not be worthwhile.
Yeah, obviously. Yep, that would be absolutely true. Yes.
Yep. Those with their backs against the wall will not be able to afford our properties. Is there a strategy for multi-tenancy? No. The strategy we've got, lots of people can afford it, but we're not going for that part of the market with their backs against the wall. CGT for the moment, it is only planned for super. Will this
sorry, can I just go back on? Can I just jump back in on that last question, George?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of people say, people can't afford the types of properties. I read in today's paper that there's a second-year electrician in Brisbane was stopped in the street and asked what she does for a living. Second-year apprentice electrician, she's getting $100,000 a year. And I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that, the prices are going up, but they're going up everywhere, and so are salaries. And landlords never really lose relative to, if there's an inflation goes up, well, guess what? We're putting the rents up. So there is a lot of money that's out there being earned by individuals, and this government is making sure that that those salaries are increasing.
Yep. CGT for the moment is only planned for super. So I think she's talking about unrealized capital gains.
Yeah, right? It's not really CGT.
No, it's not. That's capital gains tax, and it's not actually, But I think what she means is unrealized capital. Will this roll out to properties outside of super? No. It's not even rolling out to super yet. So that's, if it happens, a long way away. If the Greens get in power, you never know. But, okay.
They didn't do well last time, but...
No, exactly. They did really poorly. Everyone did except for Labor.
Yeah. That's right. They did. But look, the nature of the taxation is different. In your personal name, you're already taxed through PAYG. That is how you get taxed. Yes, there is another clip on capital gains tax. Your superannuation, what they're looking to do is try and pump that up a little bit, just because they think that they can. That's what they're trying to do with that unrealized gain. And people, just to clarify that point about that George and I were talking about, is people talk about whether it's a capital gain. Technically, it is a gain of the capital of the asset, but they're taxing it through Div 293, which is that your fund has actually just achieved much more than what it should, and therefore instead of getting a concessional tax, which is 15%, we're now putting it up to 30%, and we're taxing it on unrealized gains.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's slightly different, technical, but different to capital gains tax.
Yeah, very different. Okay, positive property deals in new property. If Australia's having difficulties building new property, what does that mean for supply of this program? Matthew, we've got very strong relationships, and there's a lot of developers where we get first option, so you'll be fine. That's why they call me John Wester Property. The properties I reject is the properties you find everywhere else, right? Yeah. There you go. I'm in for buying houses with affordable rent, so peeps have a bed to sleep in with safe dreams, something I never had. Yep, that's good. Does this also apply to shares? Yes, it doesn't matter when it comes to your super, whether it's shares, gold, property, it's just the super fund, correct?
Yep. TSB, total superannuation benefit. That is all of the amount of value net that you hold in your superannuation fund. It's your total superannuation benefit. Yep. If you've got two funds, one that you hold property in, another one that you have shares in, they'll be added together. It will be your total superannuation holdings.
Okay. Yep. So look, we've only got 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to quick fire the last few questions. And then, Jeff, if there's anything else you'd like to add after these questions, I'll give you an opportunity because, wow, we've almost gone over time. Sharon said, is it true? Hey?
T Time flies when you're having fun, George.
Absolutely, that's right. Sharon said,
Yeah.
is it true that if you're separated, not divorced, can your ex go after your assets? And if so, how do you protect your assets?
Okay. There are three steps in separating from someone. It doesn't matter if you're married or a de facto, but very quickly, the first step is custody of the children. So that's family law court. The next step is the divorce, which only people call it divorce, but that's not what the most important thing is. That merely separates, according to the government, your marriage to now being single, and it's only a matter of the births, deaths, and marriages and the divorce court, which is called the Federal Circuit Court. But the third and most important is what's called the financial settlement. Now, the financial settlement is an agreement often stamped by the courts, or if you can't agree, you go through to a divorce court. But the simplest and easiest way, and the way that all of the federal writing about this. So if you go to the Federal Circuit Court portal, it will tell you the best way to do it is not with a lawyer. The best way to do it is through an instrument called a binding financial agreement. If you go down that particular pathway and you give full disclosure, you can get it done in about 6 weeks. And it's merely an agreement between the two of you. So if you go through lawyers, you get pulled into a quagmire, and you'll spend $100,000 each on letters, which are basically meaningless because you're essentially trying to agree with each other. But that's what the legal game is. And so I can say, because I've owned and run a law firm for many years. But the model is, well, maybe if I say this, if the efficiency and effectiveness of a lawyer is to get the job done well and quickly, then they're the only industry in the world that get paid more for the worse they are. So the
Exactly.
worse they are at that, the better, the more they are remunerated, and that's a fundamental problem with it. But
Which is a big problem, because they get remunerated for dragging things out. Because every time they send a
absolutely.
letter out, every time they disagree, new court date, it just drags it out. Yeah,
And they're very good at finding where the argument is, remembering that the relationship, they're already unhappy with each other anyway. And so it's really easy to just throw a match onto a Tinder bomb, and then the lawyers instruct, well, do not talk to, only talk through me. And of course, it's $1,800 a throw when you talk through the lawyer. So come back to, yes, you can get sued, but there are time elements to it, and it's probably for another meeting for now. But yes, you can get sued if you haven't got the binding financial agreement done, the court orders done. So yes, you can. Yeah.
Okay. Nick said, stuff the politicians, get around the system, build your portfolio, and live the dream. I love it, Nick.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And
It
one last
sounds like you're in
question.
the right place. Sounds like you're in the
Exactly.
right
Nick
place,
is.
Nick.
Nick is. He is, definitely. And one last question. When can you withdraw from your super?
Well, when you meet what's called a condition of release, and that's either you're totally and permanently disabled, you've met the age of retirement, and you're no longer working. In a self-managed super fund, it's easier to get a condition of release because you're asking the trustees, and you're actually the trustee, so you're not going to get too many arguments there. But if you're in a larger super fund, you ask the trustees if you can retire at age 60. Well, the trustees have got a vested interest in holding on to your money as long as they possibly can. So generally speaking, that's why you never really get out of them until you're age 67, which is the designated age by the government for retirement in this country at the moment.
Okay. So with a self-managed super fund, you can get out quicker.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can get out at generally around age 60.
Well, there you
You
go.
know, yeah, you can, we need to do some stuff,
Yep.
but yeah,
Yeah,
around
but it all
60.
depends on your strategy too, because you might not want to
That's
get
right.
out earlier, because
That's right.
you might want to go later. So it all depends on. I think that's a very complicated thing. You need someone to help you with,
Mm.
to have a
Yeah.
look at your assets, whether you're working, your income, and all that sort of stuff. Because
Yes,
once
that's
you
right.
retire, you can still go back to work, can't you?
Yeah, you can. You can. You can, and it's a bit of a hazy area, but you need to have had the very firm belief that you intend to retire and never going to work a day in your life when you retire. And then on Monday morning, if you happen to wake up and have had an epiphany that you want to go back to work, well, George, you can go back to work. So that's the thing. But at the time that you retire, you need to have had that absolute belief that you are never going to work again in your life. And then, there's no, it's very, very hazy, that particular area. But you can still return to work after you have retired if you choose to do so.
Yep.
The catalyst is when you can access your funds. And when you go to access your funds, you need to have been of a frame of mind that you don't intend to work again. And then the government says, okay, we're going to release your funds. And then if for circumstances other than that, sometime in the future, you want to go and return to work and earn some more money, well, you're able to do that.
Yeah, which is good because it's not a dictatorship. You should be able to do that if you want to.
That's right. Exactly. And it's your money. So that's right.
Yep. Well, someone said, what are your chances of accessing your funds if you get made redundant at age 60?
Yeah, well, you can, and you can make an application to the trustee. If you're age 60 and you're made redundant, we call that the golden handshake. That's fantastic news for some, but for other people it may not be.
Exactly.
But I work with a lot of people who have retired and they don't want to go and sit on a beach all day every day. They want to do that for 3 months, but then you want to get back into it. Otherwise, you're going to turn to drink. And
Jeff, I retired in my 30s from property, and I thought I made it, and here I am back working. So there you go. So
and you probably never. And you probably never worked harder. I see how hard you work, George. So you probably never worked harder, but also...
No, but I love it, though. I love it. I really enjoy it. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
If you find something you love, it's better than being retired. It really is.
Exactly.
But being retired is better than doing something you hate, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So any closing remarks before we finish, Jeff?
Not really. I think I really was moved by what you're talking about your health. Before I heard a great saying, someone said to me the other day, if someone gave you $10 million, walked up to you in the street and said, here's $10 million, would you take it? And I said, yeah. And then they said, what if I said to you, if you take the $10 million, you're not going to wake up tomorrow? And I said, well, no, I don't want the $10 million. And they said, well, whenever you wake up in the morning, the first thing you need to say to yourself is, you know what, today is a $10 million day. So
I love it, Jeff.
When you were talking about your health before, George, I thought, it's we can all talk about putting cookies in the cookie jar. We can talk about putting the lid on them as well. But ultimately, our health is our wealth, and it's really, really important that we find some time to spend some time with our families as well.
Agreed. Look, the healthy man has got a million wishes, and the sick man's got one.
Yeah. So true.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No worries. Talk soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye.